We would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations as the traditional owners of the unceded land on which we are broadcasting today.
We respectfully recognise elders past, present and future.
Welcome to Newsline.
Brought to you live from the Media Precinct in RMIT Melbourne.
Hello, I'm Benita Machulis.
And I'm Rebecca Kazmierczak. Today on the program, we'll be having a look at St Kilda's resident penguin colony, how hospitality businesses are coping post-pandemic, the positive impact of a community running group on women, and floods in regional Victoria.
We'll also have updates across sport, international affairs and weather. But first to today's headlines. A security breach has sparked delays to services at Melbourne Airport this morning after a passenger bypassed screening. Qantas operations were put on hold and all passengers in Terminal 1 had to be pre-screened. This is the second airport security breach at Australian airports today, with people forced to evacuate Adelaide Airport just before lunchtime. The two incidents are unrelated.
Optus could face millions of dollars in fines as two regulators announce investigations. The Office of the Australian Information Commissioner and the Australian Communications and Media Authority will launch separate but coordinated investigations into data security measures. The investigations will look at whether Optus met its obligations as a telecommunications company following last month's historic data breach. If taken to court, Optus could face fines of up to $2.2 million.
Victoria's COVID-19 pandemic declaration will end tomorrow night, with isolation requirements lifting early. From 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, Victorians will no longer be required to isolate when testing positive to COVID-19. Financial support for eligible healthcare workers when isolating will still be available.
A confidential report has found Victoria's anti-corruption watchdog failed to protect a domestic violence survivor. The victim survivor was physically assaulted by her former partner, Darren Hanegraaff, who was a police officer. The report found that Victoria's anti-corruption watchdog, IBAC, handballed her case to Victoria Police, which exposed her to further harm. The Victorian Inspectorate has made recommendations to improve the handling of complaints involving police officers.
And today marks the end of Fat Bear Week, the popular competitions to vote for the largest bear in the Katmai National Park in Alaska. Thousands of people are tuning in to watch the annual tournament, where participants vote for their favourite bear. Voters have been following their favourite candidates on webcams in the park as they fish for salmon and trundle through the Brooks River.
Now we have Jamina Nuruddini joining us for international news. Hey Jamina, thanks for being with us today. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening around the world?
Of course. International condemnation of Russia has poured in at the United Nations General Assembly after one of the heaviest days of Russian attacks on Ukraine since the war began. The attacks, which have hit 11 Ukrainian cities, including the capital Kyiv, targeted both civilians and civilian infrastructure. The attacks have killed at least 14 and wounded nearly 100, with Ukrainian authorities reporting that power and water were knocked out in multiple cities. Putin said that the strikes were in retaliation for the blast that destroyed the Kerch Bridge on Saturday.
Без ответа преступления подобного рода уже просто невозможно. Сегодня утром по предложению Министерства обороны и по плану Генерального штаба России нанесен массированный удар высокоточным оружием большой дальности воздушного, морского и наземного базирования по объектам энергетики, военного управления и связи.
US President Joe Biden condemned the attacks as senseless, whilst also pledging the supply of advanced air systems following the strikes. He said in a statement, These attacks killed and injured civilians and destroyed targets with no military purpose. They once again demonstrate the utter brutality of Mr. Putin's illegal war on the Ukrainian people. We offer our condolences to the families and loved ones of those who were senselessly killed today, as well as our best wishes for the recovery of those who were wounded.
Jemina, Ukraine's been making some territorial and strategic gains recently. Does this change the nature of the war?
Today's attacks, the general consensus seems to be, militarily speaking, no, not really. The attacks seem to have focused on civilians and civilian infrastructure. We had Kyiv attacked in the heaviest bombardment since the beginning of the war in February, with things like a popular pedestrian bridge attacked, a child's playground was attacked. However, we also have had critical infrastructure like water and energy supplies hit. Now, Zelensky is reporting that there are certain regions in Ukraine which have been have the energy supplies recovered, but others are still ongoing. The impact on Ukrainian morale, though, that might be a different question. We've also got Biden pledging to Zelensky to supply advanced air defense systems after the attacks today. So it may be changing the nature of the war in ways that were unpredicted for Putin.
Thanks, Jemina. And look, we know these attacks come off the back of the destruction of the Kerch Bridge a few days ago. Can you tell us why the destruction of the bridge is triggering such a reaction from Vladimir Putin?
Well, the most important thing to recognise is that logistically speaking, this bridge was critical to Russia. It's the only supply point between connecting Russia and the Crimean Peninsula. So it's a 19-kilometre long bridge. It was only built in 2018 with Putin himself driving a truck across it to open it. It came at the cost of $3.6 billion US, the building, and it also happened on Putin's 70th birthday, which might be worth noting. So the attack on that bridge has led to hardliners within Putin's circle calling for further action. And I mean, this is also happening in a broader context of Putin hardliners saying that Putin has been too soft on Ukraine, and they've been using this as an argument that the Ukrainian army has been acting as a terrorist group more than an army.
Thanks so much for that comprehensive summary, Jemina. Let's go to Iran, where there have been weeks of protests following the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody. What's the latest?
Of course. Workers in Iran's vital oil and energy industry have joined the wide-ranging protests following the death of Mahsa Amini in police custody a month ago. Unconfirmed reports on social media are showing workers at an oil refinery blocking the road into the plant and chanting "Death to the dictator." It follows the hacking of Iran's state-run broadcaster on Saturday, when a news program was interrupted for a few seconds before regular programming resumed. The images showing Iran's supreme leader with a target on his head and the faces of Miss Amini and 3 other women killed since the protesters began.
Jemina, there have been reports of violence against protesters and even teenagers going missing. What exactly is happening here?
So we're entering the 4th week of protests in Iran, and these protests have spread across the country in all regions. And particularly in the education sector, you have social media footage of young girls taking their hijabs off in schools. But recently, headlines have been dominated by the death of two teenage girls, one a 17-year-old and one a 16-year-old. Now, Nika Shakarimi, she died in Tehran after participating in protests, and she went missing just days before her 17th birthday. Now, 10 days later, they found her body, but the thing is, she went missing hours after footage of her standing on a dumpster and taking off her hijab and burning it went viral. Then there's also the death of Serena Ismaili Zadeh. She was a 16-year-old YouTuber and vlogger, and she died late last month in the region of Karaj. Now, Iranian authorities are claiming that she committed suicide by jumping off her family's roof, where her family is contradicting that report. And the targeting of children is just not unique in this situation. We have human rights groups, the Iranian Society for Protecting the Rights of the Child. They've been reporting that 28 children have been killed over the last 4 weeks of protests.
We're heading to a short break now. Thanks for that, Jamina. Coming up, we'll be hearing about farmers seeking incentives for renewable energy and a little penguin community in St Kilda. Stay with us.
The farming body has recommended that the government provide greater incentives for farmers to invest in renewable energy. Andy Wilson has more.
Thanks, Beck. Despite Australia making a significant shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy, today's report from Farmers for Global Action highlights that the roles of farmer can actually be better utilised. Farmers claim they are not being consulted enough in renewable energy developments, and the report recommends that there be more government incentives for landholders to establish their own renewable infrastructure. I'm speaking with Mike Keynes, who runs Pecora Dairy Farm in New South Wales. Mike, you recently installed a new solar panel system in addition to a 40 kilowatt hour battery on your property. Is this something we are going to see a lot of from other farmers?
Climate change. We are experiencing increasing energy costs and also energy security. So the advantages for us are that not only are we able to future-proof our business, bring down our costs, make ours a more sustainable farm, but because we're at the end of the line, we are more susceptible to blackouts. So by having our own batteries and our own solar panels, we're able to ensure that our business can sail through those times where the grid fails us.
And Mike, can you tell us, how does this affect interactions with neighbours with sharing some of the energy?
So one of the things that we're doing is we're engaged in a peer-to-peer trading system. So that means that us with 2 or 3 other farmers, that's where it started initially. It's grown to many more farmers than that. But it essentially means that we're able to sell and trade our excess energy amongst each other. That's really important because right now you're getting a pittance for putting energy into the grid. It's about 7 cents per kilowatt hour. But by trading it amongst ourselves, we get to get a bigger return on our investment. It also means that farmers are able to trade energy within their own sites. This really is a game changer. It changes the economics about how farmers can secure their own energy resilience, but it also gives farmers an extra mechanism by which they can create an income stream.
And lastly, what kind of incentives from the government are you envisaging?
One of the things that government can do is they can change the arrangements around how we're able to trade energy. So, for instance, there are these huge transmission costs in being able to trade energy amongst each other. So one of the things that the government can do is they can make it a much more simplified system. So if I'm trading energy with my neighbour, then that should be at a much lower transmission cost than if I'm trying to trade energy with someone across town or in a different city. So by changing the energy market, by allowing the energy market to be disrupted, we're going to have a scenario where there will be a much more rapid uptake of energy and renewables, and it will create much better loads, much more evenly spread loads than the highly centralised system that we've got at the moment.
Thanks, Mark. Back to you, Benita and Beck.
Thanks, Andy. The St Kilda Little Penguins are a well-known community attraction that live by the pier. But with recent major construction beginning, there are concerns about the penguins' habitat. Alanda Fernandez reports.
Works continue at the $53 million St Kilda Pier reconstruction, beginning the long-awaited phase in February of this year. The pier and breakwater are estimated to finish construction in around 18 to 24 months. This redevelopment comes to increase public access and recreational space with an estimate of over 830,000 visitors each year. But how has this construction and time frame impacted the locals and the little penguins that live there? The colony of penguins live in the boardwalk due to the isolation of the breakwater, but the construction going on is a lot more than what these penguins are used to. Penguin expert Dominic Grandley-Smith believes the construction to be important, but it has to have major considerations to penguin breeding and their curiosity.
Because obviously, usually it's one penguin that stays and looks after the egg, and then the other one goes out into the ocean, and then they kind of tag team it. So it's like co-parenting is what we should all be going for. So as long as they're not, I suppose, building during the time that's happening, could be a way of reducing it.
Penguin viewing and the main pier are currently closed, possibly until 2024. St Kilda local Deb Jones came down to visit the penguins despite the disruptions.
At the moment it's probably a little bit disruptive for them, but hearing what they're doing, it's supposed to be better for them.
The state government has stated they are working closely with volunteer group Earthcare to regularly monitor and manage the penguins, and that new foundations have just been placed to give the penguins an additional 140 metres of protected habitat.
Behind me I've got the piles that have gone down to help construct the viewing platform for the little penguin colony. It's important to keep St Kilda's cutest residents safe, and this iconic project will transform St Kilda Pier for generations to come.
Reporting for RMIT Newsline, I'm Alana Fernandez.
The federal government is set to amend the anti-siphoning laws, which will affect the way we watch sport. Crossing live to our reporter Casey McCarthy with more. Thanks for joining us, Casey. Firstly, what are the anti-siphoning laws?
So these are effectively a set of laws that guarantee that certain sports events are are broadcast on free-to-air television. So it includes notably the AFL, the NRL, all national rugby union games, the Australian Open Tennis, Melbourne Cup, and any other sports events that are deemed culturally appropriate or integral to the country. So free-to-air broadcasters must have first access before any paid provider when making negotiations with sports organisations. But these laws were created in 1994 and therefore only include Foxtel as a pay provider.
It sounds like maybe these laws are a bit outdated, Casey. What are the proposed changes?
So the proposed changes by the government would simply lump all streaming services into the same category as the pay TV network Foxtel, and therefore restrict them from having first access to any hosting rights for certain sports events. So the changes are really being made because we've seen a large migration of sports broadcasting to streaming services and platforms. You only have to look at the main four football codes in Australia, and AFL and NRL largely on KO, Rugby Union exclusive to Stan, A-League Soccer on Paramount Plus, and other soccer events are on Optus Sport. So making these changes are really all about making sport accessible for as many people across the country and free in most cases. And it was actually a pre-election promise by the Labor Party.
When would the proposed changes be made, Casey?
So the government this week began consultation on the changes. That will run until the first week of December for the inquiry into the future of sport on TV. The current set of laws are due to expire in April next year, so one could assume that it would be from that point onward. For instance, the AFL, so the largest sports organisation in Australia, has already inked its new broadcast deal, which will be shared between Foxtel and Channel 7 until at least 2031.
Thanks for joining us today, Casey. Now, as Melburnians re-emerge from pandemic times and into spring, lots has changed about how we see our four-legged friends. More and more people treat their canine companions as part of the family. So is it time for dogs to be allowed in cafes? Benita has more.
Australia has one of the highest rates of pet ownership in the world. Dogs remain our most popular furry friend. And in Stonington, this is no different, where there is estimated to be over 30,000 dogs. Residents of Stonington love their dogs, particularly when it comes to companionship and feeling connected to their community.
Oh, bye. Good to see you. See you tomorrow.
Closer bonds with our dogs and a reluctance from owners to tie them up outside means pets are joining their owners inside cafes. And not everyone is happy about it. Stonington Council's Health Department receives around one complaint every month from members of the community about dogs being inside cafes. Popular local cafe Nigel, situated very close to this much-loved dog park, is the latest cafe to fall victim to a complaint.
So having to tell a lot of our loyal two-legged and four-legged customers that they weren't allowed to bring their pets inside, it was pretty disappointing for them and for us.
While some are disappointed, others are happy about the rules being enforced.
But we approve the notice.
The space is too small, and one day a dog did do its business right in the middle of the cafe, which was not nice.
But most say it's time for change.
Nowadays, so many people have dogs and they're part of people's lives. I think we should take the idea from Europe.
It's uncertain whether we will see any changes made to the Food Safety Code anytime soon. In the meantime, dogs will have to make arrangements to enjoy their breakfast at the dog park instead. This has been Benita Michulis, RMIT Newsline. We'll be back after a short break to look at Fashion Week in Melbourne and how hospitality businesses are faring post-pandemic. Stay with us.
Hi, just checking confirming that you can hear me in the studio.
Welcome back to Newsline. Fashion Week hit the runway in Melbourne yesterday, highlighting the work of Melbourne's best designers. Reporter Gab Petrarca has more.
Thanks, Beck. We're here in Federation Square, where this morning the Taking Black runway happened. We're here with Erika from Warren of Canuck, and she'll be talking to us. They'll be talking to us a little bit about their role in Fashion Week. So, hi. So why did you guys choose to show on Fashion Week this week?
This week has been very important for our people holistically. We've been able to showcase our talents that have been overlooked and underestimated through, I guess, throughout for quite a while. And yeah, it's Werner Canuck is bringing the message of land back, and yeah.
So would you like to tell us a little bit about the other designers? Because I know you have quite a connection with who are the other designers who are showing at Fashion Week.
Yeah, we've got Jaron Street and Nungala Creative. We've got Take.
So Indigenous, this pop-up runway that happened this morning by Taking Black, it was a return from a similar runway that happened last year along the Yarra River.
Yeah.
So we've had a number of designers, and would you like to tell us a little bit about what your brand specifically does in the fashion landscape?
Yes. So our brand is it is taking the platform of fashion to, I guess, reiterate the message of land back. It's not specifically tailored to being fashion design. We have other works that are speaking to land back as artists in the arts industry, I guess. We have a piece in Koori Heritage Trust, if you want to come and look at it. It's an exhibition called Rainbow of Tomorrows. It's a Black queer exhibition. Yeah, I guess our main aim is to just bring up the conversation and I guess, yeah, land back, I should say, is about raising money to buy back land, to regenerate in a very First Nations way, so that we can grow food and medicines for everybody. We are wanting to make sure that people understand that the climate change is seen by our people as a climate disaster that could have been maybe a bit more prevented if our message had been listened to more previously. There's a lot of damage to the environment that we're wanting to remedy. Yeah.
Thank you. Now, a number of designers will be featured for the rest of the week until Sunday, and featuring more Indigenous artists and student designers from a diversity of cultures and backgrounds. The Fashion Week theme for this year is To the Front, promoting diversity in gender and culture in fashion.
Thanks so much,
Back to the
Gab.
studio with you.
Thanks for joining us, Gab. Great insight into Fashion Week, how it's much more about just the clothes. Almost a year since Melbourne exited its last lockdown, the challenges for small business continue. Staff shortages are making it difficult for restaurants across the state to keep their doors open while inflation forces prices up. Jamina Nuruddini reports.
At this family-run Melbourne restaurant, the struggle to find staff has never been so great as it has over the last 12 months. For Laura Mercury, the lack of workers has led to the decision to close her doors on a Monday just to give her overworked staff a break.
That's part of the reason why we chose to close on a Monday. One, so that we could rest, but two, that would just cover, because we don't have that extra staff, it meant that the people in the kitchen are working 7 days, a lot of us were working 7 days, we were getting burnt out, mental health became a bit of an issue as well.
Laura says that before the pandemic, an ad for a position would get 30 to 40 applicants. These days, she might get 3 to 4, and is lucky if half of them show up for the interview. Meanwhile, those who do show up are sometimes asking for pay she simply cannot afford, with one barista asking for $70 an hour. Staff shortages are not the only challenge facing businesses. With inflation hitting a 21-year high and increasing the cost of everything from transportation to coffee beans, family-run restaurants such as Pier 71 are being left with little choice but to pass on those increased costs to their customers just to keep their doors open. Michael Tagayas, owner of an inner-city cafe, has tried to absorb what costs he can, but covering expenses from suppliers is becoming increasingly difficult.
Every supplier has raised their prices, so by the time a plate gets to the table, you know, the avocado's gone up, the bacon's got up, the bread's got up, you know, coffee's gone up, everything's gone up, so it's made it really difficult.
Just another difficulty for small businesses that have managed to survive the last few years. Jamina Nuruddini reporting for RMIT Newsline.
After the break, we'll be back with the latest news in sport with reporter Adam Miller.
We'll also look at how a popular community running group is positively impacting women. You're watching Newsline. Stay with us. Welcome back to Newsline. Thanks for staying with us. Now to the latest in sport with reporter Adam Miller.
In AFL, much chatter surrounds the blockbuster trade deal which has taken place between four clubs that have sent former number one draft pick Jason Horne-Francis to Port Adelaide, as well as West Coast Eagles forward Junior Rioli, who is following suit. GWS, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide and West Coast are all involved in the trade, with Port requiring the cooperation of both the Giants and Eagles to pay the highly rated Horne-Francis from the Kangaroos' grasp, who weren't willing to let him go without a solid price attached to him. Negotiations were started as soon as the trade period opened last week, were finalised late last night. The Kangaroos now head into the draft with both the second and third overall pick, while GWS have gained a prize first pick and with they expected to select highly rated youngster Aaron Cadman. From the Australian game, we now turn our attention to the beautiful game of football. Liverpool's Premier League struggles continue following the defeat to the highly rated Arsenal outfit, in which the Gunners defeated the Reds 3-2. A first-minute Gabriel Martinelli goal gave the Gunners the perfect start to the game, before Uruguayan striker Darwin Núñez tied the game for Liverpool. But Liverpool's joy of this was short-lived, with a last-minute penalty for the foul on Arsenal star Gabriel Jesus. The game was marred by an incident between Liverpool's Jordan Henderson and Arsenal's Gabriel Magalhaes, in which accusations of racism have been put against Liverpool captain Henderson. An investigation is forthcoming, with the findings expected to be released later this week after investigation by the Football Association of England. The first World Gravel Cycling Championships were held over the weekend in Veneto, Italy. The event had been seen as a major moment for gravel cycling, which has long been overshadowed by its mainstream counterparts within the cycling sector, such as road cycling, BMX and cyclocross. The races were well attended, with spectators from near and far lining the route to cheer on their favourite athletes. In the women's race, it was Frenchman Pauline Ferrand-Favreau who emerged victorious. In the men's race, it was Belgian Yanni Vermeersch who also delivered spectacular solo win after 6 hours of brutal racing. For Perot's achievement, it was just absolutely stunning. She now holds 4 world championships in 4 separate disciplines and has proven herself to be one of the greatest cyclists of all time this year alone. Thank you for joining me, and I think we're going to head back to the studio.
Thanks for that, Adam.
Joining us now, we have Professor Catherine Bennett to talk about the upcoming end to COVID isolation rules. Professor Bennett is a chair in epidemiology at Deakin University and is an expert in public health practice, research and academia. Welcome and thanks for joining us, Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. Changes to Australia's isolation rules, which come into effect on Friday, remove the mandate for people to isolate if they test positive for COVID. Does this mean we stop testing?
No, it actually doesn't change what we should be doing to monitor our own health and also to try and ensure that we're managing the risks we might pose to other people as well. That stays just as important. Removing the mandate, when you think about it, actually doesn't change a lot for a lot of people. They've been relying on people actually recognising symptoms or knowing they've been exposed and testing and then isolating. It also is about the workplace though, and high-risk workplaces will continue to ask all staff who are infectious to be isolating. But also some other workplaces might still continue that as well. It's in their interest not to have people in the office or in the factory or wherever they're working who might be then putting other people at increased risk of being off sick the next week. So they've got to manage this now in a way that's sustainable going ahead and that's looking after the health of their staff, but also, making sure that the business still runs by not having all your staff off sick because you're not managing it. So I don't think we're going to see a massive change. Thankfully, casual staff who are most vulnerable in the sense that they have to work to have income and many can't afford to stay at home, those in those high-risk settings will still have some support. And in Victoria, there is still casual worker sick leave available more generally as well. So I think these are the initiatives going ahead that are going to continue to be important to allow people to individually, manage their situation and workplaces to manage the situation that will help keep us all that bit safer.
In the absence of mandatory isolation rules, if I've tested positive for COVID-19, how long should I isolate for?
Well, the guidance before was, 7 days. If you're not symptomatic, then you might actually be cleared earlier. And if you know to do a rapid antigen test, then that's actually a good indication. Sometimes you can miss an infection at the early part, but in fact, you're better off if you're later in an infection using a rapid antigen test to screen whether or not you've stopped shedding virus and you're actually good to go. Even then, you'd still put a mask on. So if you're not symptomatic, that's where they reduce that to a 5-day requirement anyway. That's probably a good time to retest and then see whether you're able to go back to working at work rather than working from home, or starting to circulate socially again. But if you've still got symptoms, then the recommendation is still 7 days, and again probably testing at the end of that. Some people get a cough that goes on for weeks, and that's a bit of a challenge because you don't want to isolate assuming you're infectious when that might have stopped way back at day 10. But if you've still got symptoms, that's when you are at high risk of still being infectious.
And due to high vaccination rates in Australia and more people having had COVID, if people are asymptomatic, how do we best monitor for COVID symptoms and keep vulnerable people in our community safe?
Well, it's always the challenge, and I was looking at data out of the UK, which showed that out of thousands and thousands, they test like 100,000 people randomly, and of the few thousand that they found that did have COVID at the time, only about half of them had typical COVID symptoms. The rest either had no symptoms or had atypical symptoms, things you wouldn't necessarily associate with COVID. So the reality is, we can't all go around all the time assuming we've got COVID, because that just wears off and people don't do anything about it. But if you know you've been exposed, it is worth having, doing a test just to make sure. If you were going to visit a very elderly friend or family member, or someone who is quite vulnerable and at risk, then that's when maybe doing a rapid antigen test can help, just to screen and make sure that you're not infectious without knowing it. It is difficult, and that's why some of these changes around isolation probably aren't going to make a massive difference, because people are infectious for a few days before they go into isolation. There's a lot of people that are missed and infectious out in the community. They're probably at a less worrying rate. They tend to have a lower viral load. But yeah, you cannot assume just because you don't have symptoms you're not infectious. So if you need to screen because you're going somewhere, or if someone, you're working with people who are at risk, then that regular screening is still important, just to be sure that you're not carrying the virus and not realising it.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Catherine.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Catherine. So new research finds physical activity is linked to reduced risk of breast cancer, as a community running group offers women more than just exercise. My co-host Rebecca Kashmirchek reports for this story.
In the heart of Melbourne's inner east, a community run group strikes out together to pace through their morning session. Led by coach John Brazel, this running group caters for all ages and abilities, but the majority of members are women.
Look, I've got a passion for running. I love it. I love being involved in it, have been for 40 plus years. Couldn't think of anything else I'd rather be doing.
But what was once a passion project became so much more as the group gained momentum, attracting 30 plus members that turn up to the bi-weekly sessions.
I love that all abilities can join and participate. It's really, really inclusive. And it's just friendly.
Bridget Lynch is the senior author of a new study that found a direct link between regular exercise and reduced risk of breast cancer.
Cancer prevention isn't just about, not doing things like not smoking, not drinking. It's also something positive that we can do.
For the female members of this community group, many have warmed up to the idea of running as regular exercise. And whilst the 6 a.m. start might shock some, running together is a safe way for women to fit in their morning activity.
We train in the mornings two times a week. Through winter it's dark, and it provides that environment of safety where they can come and train and not have to worry about looking over their shoulder.
I love the group feeling because it's a safe environment, running in an area where I'm comfortable.
For others, The friendship and community keeps them running back for more.
I don't really love running, but I love getting out and meeting everyone, being part of the group.
We've met some of our best friends here.
Which we didn't expect.
No.
Rebecca Kazmierczak for RMIT Newsline.
With so much going on here in Melbourne and beyond, it can all be a little overwhelming. We've brought in reporter Sam Varian to give us a roundup of what's going on. How have you been, Sam?
I've been really good, thanks, Bonita. I'm happy to be here, excited to be here.
You're a knowledgeable man. Give us the roundup for today.
I would absolutely love to. Let's take a look first at arts and culture. I think that's an appropriate starting point. One of the exciting things happening at the moment is the Melbourne Fringe Festival. So that's been going since the 6th of October and will be going till the 23rd of October. So we're in the midst of it now. So if you're not familiar with Fringe, it's got cabaret, circus, comedy, dance, kids events. And this one on the screen now is my pick for it. It's Lollybags. That's by Hannah Camilleri, who won the Golden Gibbo Award at Melbourne International Comedy Festival, ended up touring that around Australia. So that's full of a smorgasbord of different sketches. There's lots there. And then we've also got John Farnham has just emerged out of surgery for mouth cancer. So his sons Robert and James say he's doing well, and he was even joking with nurses. And he's mostly just keen to rest up and, looking forward to getting better. And then onwards we have two protesters from Extinction Rebellion who glued their hands to a Picasso painting at the NGV yesterday. They've since been arrested. And onwards, we've got Rex Orange County, the singer-musician. His name is Alexander O'Connor. He's been charged with 6 counts of sexually assaulting a woman, but he has pleaded not guilty. And then after that, very exciting news, we've got the Super Mario Brothers movie. The teaser trailer was released last week, and that's got Jack Black as Bowser and Chris Pratt as Mario. So that's going to come out in April 2023. It's the first adaptation of the Mario franchise since 1983. Although some people are a little bit uncertain about Chris Pratt and his voicing of Mario. He doesn't quite do a very good Mario Italian accent, but it is a very stereotypical accent. Should they have gotten an authentic Italian American plumber to voice Mario? Who knows? The answer can't be answered, but it's fine. I'm sure it'll be an excellent movie. But now let's take a look at the headlines across the world. We have heard from Jamina about international news, but let's have a look at Spain first. So there we've got the focus is on Putin and his renewed missile attacks on Ukraine. So that's, of course, making news across the world. But interestingly, on the right there, we've got an article about historically increased funding for the autonomous regions in Spain. So you might remember years ago there was the riots in Barcelona and Catalonia about those, sort of disputes and tensions between the regions. So that's interesting there to see. And then over to the UK, we have again got a focus on the Ukraine and also Iran, as we heard from Jamina previously. But then also at the top there, we've got a dispute over welfare cuts with ministers in Liz Truss's party pleading for unity as she considers another U-turn in policy, because of course last week she did U-turn on tax cuts as our Albanese government is currently trying to decide. But now let's go over to across the Atlantic to New York, where we're of course again seeing a focus on Ukraine. But very interestingly there, an article about a young man who has headed over to Ukraine to start a private citizens group to join the effort after fighting in, I believe it was Iraq and Afghanistan. And then we're also still in the US. We'll go over to the Washington Post where, again, I hate to repeat myself, but Ukraine, it is obviously worldwide and massive news. But then on the right there, we do also have an interesting reflection on whether the massive spending that Biden put into the US economy just after COVID. Last year, you might remember, a $2 trillion package, whether that's actually just created more inflation and the impending recession that we're seeing. But there's also other things going on besides Ukraine, and there are places that are paying attention to other things. For example, we've got Italy, where we've got the recently elected Giorgia Meloni, the far-right leader there. So the headline there, if you know Italian, it says, "We are not monsters, but European patriots." So a lot of tension within the party itself, who don't want to be involved with this kind of idea that this idea of monsters of the far right and that kind of thing, the press that has received, and this idea that it's a fragile government and it's only just really begun. And similar things in Brazil, where they're in the midst of another election. So we've got the Sao Paulo newspaper, and we've got Bolsonaro and Lula. So Bolsonaro being the right-wing candidate, and Lula on the left. So they've just done. They've kind of tied. There wasn't an absolute majority between them, so they're going on to a runoff. And what we've seen recently is, but basically, if you're not familiar with what's going on in the Brazilian election, we can have a little chat about it. So basically, Bolsonaro was elected it's not long after Trump was elected, and is definitely far right and has been associated with increased deforestation in the Amazon and a chaotic pandemic response. But as him and this new left candidate, Lula, who is actually an ex-president of Brazil, as they're fighting off, it's getting a bit testy, with previous comments by Bolsonaro coming to light, where he actually said that he would eat an indigenous Brazilian person. So let's maybe take a quick look at that. I don't know if we have that there. It's quite an interesting little take. But that's all right if we don't. But so why don't we go on to something that's a bit of a lighter touch with some cartoons. So let's start with the Australian Financial Review with David Rose there. We've got here, you can see stage 2.5 on our way to stage 3 tax cuts. So this idea that we're, sinking in the submarines with the Albanese government, and steady as you go, where we're losing power, the economy is losing power, so you can tell what the AFR thinks there. And but over at The Age, we're looking at Kathy Wilcox is looking at the local Victorian election. So she's there criticising the homogeneity of the two parties, and why should we pay attention to it? Because of course we have had quite interesting election commitments, with the Liberals saying that they'll give it $2 a day max on public transport, or halving the cost of V-lines. So quite interesting nitty-gritty election commitments, not necessarily exactly the kind of climate integrity sort of things that we've seen in previous elections.
Thanks for joining us, Sam.
No worries.
That was an incredibly comprehensive roundup. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
We'll be back after a short break and an update from reporter on La Nina, Andy Wilson.
We'll also have Welcome back. You're watching Newsline. I'm Benita Machulis.
And I'm Rebecca Kazmierczak. We are coming towards the end of our program now, but first, a look at finance and weather with Cody Fowler.
Thanks, Beck. Australian shares begin the day higher, despite a drop on Wall Street and losses in European stocks. ASX futures were up 24 points, or 4%. This morning, the ASX 200 sits at 6,708 points, up 0.6%. The Dow Jones is down 0.32%, the Nasdaq is slightly down, while the Nikkei is also down. The price of gold is up 0.9%, while crude oil is down, at a price of $90.50. The Aussie dollar is buying 63 US cents, 65 euro cents, 57 British pence, and just over 91 Japanese yen. Now to weather. Partly cloudy in Melbourne today with a max of 22 degrees. Tomorrow's forecast, a warm overnight minimum of 15 degrees before showers increase throughout the course of the day, up to 21 degrees by mid-afternoon. Around the country on Wednesday, 12 to 17 degrees in Adelaide alongside showers throughout the day, warm and partly cloudy in Brisbane up to 24 degrees, partly cloudy in Canberra after a cold start of 7 degrees, in Darwin up to 34 degrees with showers and a possible afternoon storm, a shower or two in Hobart with a top of 20. Mostly sunny in Perth up to 21 degrees and 14 to 21 degrees and cloudy in Sydney. Looking ahead to our 7-day forecast, heavy rainfall is expected across all of Victoria overnight and on Wednesday and into Thursday, with up to 50 millimetres to fall in Melbourne on Thursday, back down to a top of 17 degrees. The Weather Bureau is set to issue several wind and flood warnings in Victoria later this week, with isolated falls of up to 100 millimetres expected in northern Victoria. Those showers will ease by Friday with just 0 to 3 millimetres forecast. Onto the weekend, Melbourne is looking at some nice clear days with maximum daily temperatures in the high teens extending until early next week. Back to you, Beck and Benita.
Thanks, Cody. That's all from the newsroom today. I'm Benita Machulis.
And I'm Rebecca Kazmierczak. You've been watching Newsline.